Thank you. For those who haven't, keep, show up, and those who have, keep coming back. It's an incredibly vibrant space. Harlem was founded as a Black Mecca, really, and I think it endures in just in terms of the socio-political fabric, the sense of community there. It remains such. So to work in Harlem for 2.5 years was an incredible experience. So I always like to kind of start with a sense of that space because it informs so much of what happens inside the building. For those of you who don't know about the history of the museum, it was founded in 1968. This is an image of it in its original location at 125th Street and 5th Avenue, just a few blocks from where it stands now. It was founded primarily, specifically, as a museum that was meant to showcase and exhibit work by Black artists. 1968 was a time of revolution, certainly in a global sense, but it was also a time in the art world specifically that many artists of color, women certainly, were not enjoying the same kind of experience and showings that a lot of white males, let's be honest, were. So at that time, 3 artists started the museum in that loft space, and it's since evolved into its more current iteration, in which it is the nexus for artists of African descent, locally, nationally, and internationally, and also for work that is inspired by Black culture. So we have a variety of ways in which we show work. We have an outstanding series called Harlem Postcards. It's a way for artists kind of outside of the mission to be engaged in Harlem. The directive is that you be photography based and that you kind of generate an image out of Harlem. So everything comes back to Harlem. And you'll see a lot of the work that I did there kind of expand out into the neighborhood and the space. I think another huge essence of the museum, a really strong component of it, and I think something that's entirely unique to this institution, is that there is an artist in residency program that runs for 11 months, begins in October, ends in September. A few of you might have applied, a few of you may in the future. We encourage it. This was a program that was started a few years into the life of the museum. And I say it's unique because that view, that opening shot that I showed you of 125th Street, as I mentioned, is the view from the studio. So the 3 artists that are selected to be part of the fabric of the museum truly are in that space with us. Our offices are on the 2nd floor. Their studios are on the 3rd floor. They have 24-hour access. And there's a kind of porosity and generousness that happens, I think, between the staff and the curators and the artists in that way. It's to your choosing, but it can be a very hands-on kind of experience, and that was my experience in kind of managing that program and creating an exhibition with 3 artists I'll talk about in a moment. But it also is a unique experience, I think, for the artists, and it's an incredible program that's seen Wangechi Mutu, Kehinde Wiley, David Hammonds, our patron saint, come through that program. So it's really a really special aspect of what we do there. So I always like to kind of start with that because that's part of the identity. We're looking at a painting, Charles, by Jordan Castile, one of the 3 artists in residence who were there during my time through 2015, 2016. Painter, trained at Yale, an incredible use and expression of color. I think you can find a lot of similarities to Alice Neal, certainly, but other kind of colorists. This is an image of the three kids. They would be probably embarrassed if they heard me say that, but they become like children after a while. You really take care of them, make sure that they're growing and protected and challenging themselves. So from the left is Jordan Castile, whose work I just showed you in the last slide. Khalil Huffman in the center and E.J. Hill on the right, in the courtyard of the state office building across the street from the museum. And you can kind of see in this incredible mural the Apollo sign, all of the kind of landmarks of 125th Street. So now we go back inside. This is Khalil Huffman's studio, kind of in process. as part of the program, we have 2 open studios throughout the year. One is a kind of introduction to the practice and for the artists to their public. It's quite a platform to have in New York City, so it's a kind of welcome party that we have. And this space later became this space in the context of the exhibition. Khalil is someone who comes out of a writing background, poetry, a real incredible use and command of language, and so you don't quite get a sense of it here, but his written form has evolved into a more visual, technical form. So these are the totality of this installation, comprised of 6-channel video. You can kind of see that there are 2-dimensional photographic images kind of hanging in the back, screened through car window glass. So Khalil kind of brought in, he broke down a formal space, I think, in a way that he hadn't really done before and that we hadn't seen in that museum space before. So it was a really exciting thing to kind of bear witness to taking shape. The video was essentially an essay. It was a poem that Khalil had written. And so in it, the female protagonist kind of walks through. It's a rumination on really Khalil's state of being, but also the state of being of a Black man in the world, in Harlem, in Los Angeles, all places that he moves through and was moving through at that time. So unfortunately, we kind of had to be there to see it and experience it. It was really special. And then E.J. Hill, who got to the program and had training at UCLA in the New Genres program, did his undergraduate work at Columbia? No, I'm in Columbus. He was in Chicago. Excuse me. Pause. As someone much more invested in performance art, and that was something that I really wanted to encourage the museum to kind of grow into in a way. So I was thrilled that he was accepted into the program. So this kind of marks the beginning of his project and his process. He got in the room and was terrified because he was not a maker of objects. He was someone who uses his body as the vessel, as the medium for the work. So he started kind of obsessively drawing these roller coasters and returned to something he had done as a child. He wanted to become some sort of civic or structural engineer early on and, became an artist, but finally made his roller coaster. So this is an installation view of a piece that E.J. called A Monumental Offering of Potential Energy. Also had a way with words. And that's E.J. kind of laying passively there on the platform. So what you see in that last slide really became translated into this narrow gallery space. It kind of had the effect of like a Dan Flavin light piece in which your vision's a little bit distorted after your encounter with it. Really minimal kind of execution. Again, the first object that E.J. made, so it was an incredibly ambitious project. And what it was meant to touch on, I think, in a lot of the ways that Jordan did with her portraits, I should mention now, of the vendors on 125th Street, primarily Black men that she paints as a Black woman to kind of give visibility to those personalities, those bodies, those characters who occupy 125th Street on a daily basis who are now like family to her. She developed an incredible relationship with all of the men that she painted, and 4 out of 6 of the people that she painted were at the opening, and it was incredibly emotional for them to see themselves represented in that institutional space. And not just any institutional space, in Harlem. It was a really beautiful thing to see come to fruition. So E.J., in his own way, in a very personal way, clearly using his own body as a queer Black man, executed an incredible performance that pushed me, that pushed him, that pushed the museum, that pushed our team and our security staff. E.J. performed like that. He did not engage with the public. It was really just a resting kind of pose that he would maintain for 8 to 9 hours every day that the museum was open. So that amounted to 522 hours of this performance. And so the lights would be on for him at the beginning of his day. He would enter quietly and just kind of get into a meditative state. That's the only way I can describe kind of engaging with him when I checked in during certain points of the exhibition. I'm just going to let everybody come in. So this to give you an idea of what's possible in the residency program. And this was just something that I'm very proud to share with people, kind of thinking through what I was able to do with that museum. It really generated, as you can imagine, a lot of conversation among our staff and certainly among our public. It was really interesting to see the function of social media in the context of this work. Who took a picture of it, who engaged with it in a certain way, and EJ was open to all of it. And I think we're all still kind of processing what that did to our audience, but also to the people who made it possible. It was a very personal thing for all of us in the end. So now I'm going to start to jump around a little bit. We're still at the Studio Museum in Harlem, but we're going to go a bunch of different places. This is an installation view of a show that I have up currently. These next two slides are, this is called The Window and the Breaking of the Window. And that's Carrie James Marshall's prints on the left. It's a series of 5. These are in our collection. Studio Museum houses over 2,200 works of art. I should also mention that we animate quite frequently. So we have 3 seasons, and often if you come, you will see a thematic exhibition drawn from our permanent collection. There's just a lot of material that can be mined from it. So in this particular iteration of a collection show, I was mixing more contemporary work with some work that referenced the past as the Carrie James Marshall do to the Civil Rights era, to talk about seeing images of protest in 2016, now 2017, because I think a lot of what certainly we hear in the media, certain kinds of media is, it's like people rioting. It's always viewed or described with this violent kind of tint to it. But for those of you who have protested and done it respectfully and safely, it's none of that. You're just expressing your free will and your opinion and your feelings about something that you're taking issue with, and that's something that we all have the right to exercise. So thinking about that from the position of the Studio Museum, again, our context in Harlem, the communities we serve, the people who come to our space, it felt like a really important thing to kind of explore in a timely way. So there is photographic work by Devin, a Baltimore-based photographer who really was creating work expressly for social media, had never really shown in museums and institutions, and that all changed very quickly in a very short time. Devin was self-taught as a photographer. He now has shown at the Smithsonian and has many more opportunities kind of unfolding in front of him, but he documented the Baltimore uprising. So that kind of began the show and set the tone. And as you can kind of see, not all of the images are really representative of protests or moments of protest, but they describe events in history, such as the marches during the Civil Rights era with Carrie James's work. There's also an incredible work by Deborah Grant called 56 Blows. It's kind of a drawing on a chalkboard in which she outlines what is a video camera and just those 2 words, 56 blows. That refers to the 1991 beating of Rodney King. So there's some of it that's really direct and some of it that's a little more abstract, but it was meant to kind of capture people and capture a moment that we all, I think, are processing individually and sometimes collectively, but I wanted to be able to do that within the space of our museum. And then downstairs, in a small gallery, I made a show called Black Cowboy, which is exactly what it sounds like, a show about Black cowboys. And that was also men, women, and children. There's an incredible history of the Black cowboy in America that is not well known or visually described, I think, in art history. And so this is an installation view that you can see it was a lot of photographs. There's a Dina Lawson on the left and a series of 4 images by Ron Tarver, a Philadelphia-based photographer who developed a body of work over 20 years solely about the subject of the Black Cowboy. He grew up in Oklahoma and returned there to document that community. Black Cowboys exist in Compton, they're in Queens, they're in Mississippi and Florida, in a number of places across the country. So for me, it was just like a beginning. It was a way to share, again, more with our audience about the possibility of the history of Black people, Black communities in America. I think we all know what John Wayne looked like, the Marlboro Man, but how striking to see a Black person in that identity and role, such a myth that's attached to this country and that's been generated for generations, really. So to complicate that a little bit. This one without the pillar in there. So when I first got to the Studio Museum in 2014, I mentioned that we have an eclectic collection of works. And so I wanted to try to figure out where I would start within that. That's kind of where curators begin their story at the Studio Museum. We're given the opportunity to develop a thematic exhibition from our collection. So what I ended up doing was returning to something that I love, which is people, and portraiture specifically, and started to mine that collection to find all of the incredible people that were represented in kind of that space over the history of our museum. So this is just taken from the wall text. I'll read it quickly. Throughout history, people of African descent have rarely been afforded complex identities, and until more recent times, their lives remain largely undocumented. The portraits contained in the museum's collection exist as primary examples of the Black community having agency in its own representation. In profile is both an affirmation of Black members of our society who have contributed to various facets of American life, medicine, industry, art, and culture, and represents those who have gone unnamed in ledgers and history books. So Black Cowboy became a full circle of this story in a way. I kind of started there and I ended there. So I think it's important to kind of be able to understand that that was something I'm often thinking about, and maybe many of you in the room are as well. This is an installation view of In Profile. We have a couple of artists in residence again represented in here. There's a Micheline Thomas floating next to a Barclay Hendricks, next to a portrait of Beverly Buchanan, and Allison Sarr kind of resting beautifully on that pedestal. And then to begin the show, the bust that's behind the plaques on the pedestal is a portrait of Dr. Willie S. Pickens Jr., one of the founding members of the NAACP. So I had a lot of fun going through those racks and digging through the files and unearthing the people and the histories there. His portrait was made by Augusta Savage, a Black sculptor, woman working in the 1920s in Harlem. She ran a workshop. She was peers with Jacob Lawrence and Gwendolyn Knight, who were also in this exhibition, but who made incredible work that looked so much like bronze. But you have to understand that it was patina plaster, because this was the material that she had access to as a Black woman working at that time. And it's incredible. I hope that they bring that out again someday. It's a really special work. Another project at the Studio Museum that feels very close to me, and someone in the audience knows this because we went to graduate school together. This is an image of Lorraine O'Grady. She's the woman behind the double frame beaming at you. Lorraine O'Grady, for those of you who do not know her practice, is a pioneer. She's incredible. She's 82 this year and began her career as an artist in her 40s. This was after she was an analyst for the CIA and a rock critic for Rolling Stone magazine. Led many lives and kind of came into art a bit later, conceptually and performatively. A particular performance that I was interested in graduate school was Mademoiselle Bourgeoisie Noire. I encourage you all to look that up if you've never heard of it. She staged it for the new museum as an intervention, really calling for exactly the things that the Studio Museum was, which was more inclusion, more risk-taking on behalf of these institutions and of those who supported the communities of artists that she was a part of. So this is one of 40 images in a series that Lorraine arranged. This is Art Is, the piece, was a performance, and it was held at the African American Day Parade, which is held in Harlem each year in September, and it has been since 1969 as a celebration of African and African American culture. So it starts at the top of Central Park at 110th and winds up Adam Clayton Powell and kind of ends at 135th. And the first year that I lived in Harlem, I think I arrived in September and it was like happening that weekend, and I saw accountants marching. There was a faction of accountants. There were garbage men who, had their own little team. There were step teams who had come up from Florida for the day to participate in this. It's an incredible experience and celebration of Harlem, really, beyond just Black culture. So you might be wondering how Lorraine got to be in the parade. This was 1983, and it was all kind of spawned from a moment that I will read from in this next slide. These are Lorraine's words. The parade idea came from wanting to expose the avant-garde to the largest number of Black people I could find at one time. That was it. My first thought was to just put artworks on the float and let people look at art. A woman had recently said to me that avant-garde art doesn't have anything to do with Black people. That was so infuriating to me. It's where the whole idea for the piece came from. To do something that would prove this woman wrong, a piece about art in front of 1 million people. Of course, it didn't end up with them looking at art. They were more making the art themselves. So this is, to give you a sense, these are all images from the series. The titles all begin with Art Is, and then parenthetically they describe the scene that you're kind of looking at. These are 16 by 20 photochrome colored prints. I hung them in a linear fashion in the gallery so that you had the kind of cinematic effect of going through a parade, or the action of seeing it but also being in it. So this is a look down 125th Street. Sorry, that's Adam Clayton Powell, where the parade route goes. On the left, the white tall building is the Hotel Teresa, where Malcolm X and Fidel Castro met before Malcolm X was murdered. So what you have to understand about this work, this is a gilded frame, right? A typical Renaissance kind of Baroque gilded frame that you would find in any museum, the one across the street, in any part of the world. And Lorraine made one that was 9 feet by 15 feet wide, put that on the float, and invited 15 performers to engage in this piece with her. These were dancers, singers, teachers, people that answered her call on the back of the Village Voice. You can imagine doing that today. Maybe the proto version of Craigslist, but with better results. This is a view of the float, kind of a close crop. And I think you can kind of see a performer in the background with the frame approaching policemen. I mean, there's so much in these images. Not only are you framing Harlem and its architecture in this, moment in 1983 before the crack epidemic hit Harlem, you are looking at the community of people. You'll see in other images it described a bit better. But the building on the right in this instance is the Renaissance Ballroom. And people like Faith Ringgold and incredible jazz musicians that are too many to name would hang out there, go dancing. It was a social club. This was torn down in 2014 to build a horrible condo building, as is the story in so many cities, and particularly in New York City. So it's a testament and kind of a relic to Harlem, but it's also, the work is an incredible use of photography as documentation of a performance in 1983. This is still something that I think artists and people are figuring out. It's an incredibly difficult thing to be able to capture the energy of the day, of the moment, of the action, which, like, I mean, these give me so much joy. I would love just going down into the gallery and finding someone or something else in these images. I'll just kind of cycle through a few of these. That's the Colt 45 float that was behind Lorraine and her team. She was mortified. She said it was a terrible, terrible showing of artistry. This is just a young man, his little baby, getting in on the fun. And I think to go back to Lorraine's quote and the genesis of the work and the frustration, the anger that she felt in being told that Black people could not participate in contemporary art, what was described as avant-garde art at that time. And really, by making this piece, not only exposing it to a public that may or may not be exposed to art often, if at all, not a judgment call that she made, but to kind of see what the potential was in that space, and also to prove that people are just so much more than we give them credit. And I think museums and institutions everywhere struggle with this idea too, constantly. It's like, how do we make our audience understand what we're doing? And sometimes you just have to trust that people can intuit what is happening in the artwork that they are seeing or in the experience that they are having. So by making art is, Lorraine, of course, got nervous at a certain point. I mean, this is tens of thousands of people lining the streets for, 30 blocks. And she said at a certain point, probably 10 minutes in, she heard and saw an older Black woman take the frame from one of the performers and said, "That's right, baby, I'm the art." And she knew that the piece worked. That was the whole point, to use this apparatus, this gilded frame that you see, Louis XIV within the space of, now it's, this is called Two Girlfriends. Now it's just two girlfriends having the time of their lives, watching the parade, and they can be the art too. They can be in charge. They can be in charge of your gaze and experience and participate really in what this performance was. And so it's just a beautiful work that was just a pleasure to bring back into Harlem, into that community. Oh, I forgot to tell you a fun story about this one. The little girl in the blue on the left, when I gave a tour to our staff, as we do every season with the shows, somebody said, "Wait a minute, that's Keisha." One of our staff members had grown up with the little girl in blue on the left. And then a couple months later, during another tour, somebody said, "Excuse me, that's my friend Keisha. I work with that woman." So the way that the piece kind of kept returning and making many happy returns was just a delight. So this is the last image in the series of 40 photographs. Art is girl pointing, and that began and ended the exhibition as an activation and a punctuation. She's pointing at you. So now we're going to leave Harlem and go to LA and talk about public art. We've talked a bit about performance now, which is a love of mine, and as is public art. As Carmen mentioned, in 2012, when I was working at LAX Art, this is the original site for the gallery, the nonprofit space that I worked at for 3 years. I was part of a really exciting process, Pacific Standard Time, which is an initiative by the Getty Museum and Research Institute, which is now just coming back on its second round, focusing on Latin American art and artists and culture in LA for this version. But what we did in 2012 as a part of the initiative was a public and performance art festival, which was insane. It was 30 projects in 11 days, and we're talking Judy Chicago and pyrotechnics in a football field in Pomona. And it was a nightclub for those 11 nights, made by Liz Glynn, in which, you would find things in the dark and take tokens of the experience and have some kind of performative thing happen to you. I mean, it was a wild, wild ride. So that was the crash course into the past and present in terms of what was possible in LA and what had happened in LA. So I show you this image of LAX art to give you a sense of it wasn't just a normal white cube. It wasn't a static box on La Cienega. It was animated always on its facade. So this is a Carl Handel work, a nice scribble. But we saw all kinds of artists kind of activate that space, or I certainly did over the 3 years. And that got me thinking about putting art in all of the nooks and crannies. It doesn't just have to be in the infrastructure that you occupy. So I started to venture outside, and I did really fun things with incredible artists. This is a double portrait of Alana Pearl by Carter Mull, a photographer based in Los Angeles, a couple of blocks from this kind of wholesale fabric market in downtown LA. He was really drawing from the club kid culture down there, was using, the material that you would be shopping for on that street. It was kind of like a meta portrait of this space, and you can see the fashion advertisement on the far right. It's a little confusing, right? You're walking down that street and just going to work, and it's like, wait, what's happening here? This billboard still exists today. Nobody's taken it down. I don't even know really how we got it up there, but this is the joy of public art. You ask impossible questions, and a lot of the times it is made possible in the end. So that was one example. And then to go back to LAX Art, this is a view of La Cienega Avenue facing, anyway. The billboard on the left is a photograph by Talia Chetrit, a New York City-based photographer. That was another space that we activated quite often. So it was the facade of the gallery, but it was also the billboard spot that we had. We did all kinds of crazy things there as well. So again, this idea of just like driving your car, trying not to road rage, and then it's like, wait, what's that? That's not a movie ad. That's like a really beautiful image of a mysterious woman who I'm confused. But the potential of that, of having people encounter something unexpected that might just not change them. It doesn't always have to change you, but maybe it just change your experience wherever you're going on a certain day, if you happen to be slowed down enough to see it. This is a view of an installation in Kings Road Park in the city of West Hollywood, project with Anna Sue Boyd, who's an incredible ceramicist and sculptor based there. This is called The Look-See. It had a mirror on the other side of it. This is a children's park. It was kind of nestled beautifully in there at about this podium height so that the park was reflected back, but also children could be reflected back into the space. So we really went a lot of places with the work. This is a sculpture by Sam Falls, photographer by training, but took kind of some of the mechanisms of that time-based medium and applied them to sculpture. So this kind of steel-coated powder sculpture, the paint was actually to be worn by the sun over time. So it shifted. The color became less saturated over the year that it was up to relate it to the medium of photography in a really beautiful way. So did a lot of that in Los Angeles and took it to Portland for changing scenes again, where I created a biennial. It was the 6th iteration of that biennial, and the first time that someone who was non-regional came to Portland to kind of give a fresh view of what was happening there. So this is an installation shot from inside Disjecta Art Center that kind of hosted the biennial. My biennial was at 4 different venues across the city of Portland. And so we had video. There was actual performance layered on top of this video installation by Kelly Rower at a certain point. This is in the next gallery. It's in an old bowling alley. It's a really gorgeous space. And you can see Jessica Jackson Hutchins' work in the back, Blair Saxon Hill kind of in the foreground floating from the ceiling, Dan May on that back wall, and a collaboration by Modu Dieng, teacher on faculty at PNCA there, and one of his former students, Devin Maldonado. They basically made me a billboard inside. It was 2-spec at that scale. You can kind of see the neon light underneath it to give it that similar effect. And it was an incredible collaboration. It was taken from an image that Devin had made in a local barber shop. There is a large and strong Black community in Portland, Oregon. It's kind of in the northern hemisphere of the city. that had never really been shown in a contemporary art context, and in this way, and certainly not in the biennial. The subject of the photograph, the man whose name I don't remember now, who's actually, giving someone a shave or shape up, came to the opening and was like, oh God, like that's me. That's my world. It was the first time that somebody had really come into the space and drawn inspiration from it and kind of put it forth to an audience. So it was really exciting for Devin and Modu and I to be able to do that together in that space. And so naturally, having seen what I was doing in LA, I had to try a billboard in Portland. So we had kind of an inside-outside. It's the same image. It's just more digitized and manipulated for the outdoor Clear Channel billboard. And not one, but actually 3 of the artists in the biennial were for the billboards that we kind of sorted out in different quadrants of the city. This is Richard Thompson. Richard's in his 70s. He's been painting the Oregon landscape on his family's farmland for 40 years. And they're these really strange kind of modernist paintings. They're just like a little bit odd, but totally true also to the feel of that place. And what I heard often in Oregon was, landscape's amazing. Everybody's outdoors all the time. There's a real close relationship to that. So I wanted to kind of be able to reflect that back in an urban space, and again, have these potentially even incite some curiosity. This is a painting by Ralph Fugai, who is funny and talented. This is called Baby Coughing, and this was Ralph's kind of commentary on the gentrification of a certain neighborhood in Portland that he found perhaps a little distasteful. I'll leave it to you to decide, but it was a way of reflecting his experiences and kind of marking time in the city. Again, this was in 2014, and the city was changing rapidly then. It probably still is now. So that was exciting to be able to do in that space as well. And then finally, one of the last, again, a collaboration, and one of the last public projects was a series of kiosks by John Zerzan, who is not a visual artist. He's an anarchist and a writer, teaching at the University of Oregon, and Christopher Micklig, his partner in crime on this one, who is the visual artist and graphic designer. So these kiosks were kind of influenced by modernist design. I think Noguchi made a series of kind of spaces like this. The kiosk, think of the Whole Foods, or at least they used to have them, the bulletin board. It's a space for information and sharing kind of resources. So that was some of the idea of this MDF sculpture. And these were imprinted with texts that John either wrote himself or sourced that were, comments and thinking around like the current state of our economy and certainly of culture and how these things have been influenced. And the day after we put the sculptures up in cooperation with the city, one was smashed at one of the sites. And the city called and they were like, hey, we've got some bad news. Someone broke this sculpture at, this one site. And Christopher and I got on the phone. I called him immediately after, and he was like, all right, just between you and I, this is awesome. And I was like, I know. We were really excited because we didn't know if it was the steampunk kid who had like 140 too many that night, or if it was the guy living in the penthouse in the new tower that they had just built in the square where the piece was located. Because I don't remember the quote exactly now, but it was something really specific about what was happening in that space, in that city at that time. And it obviously touched someone in a way that, we don't encourage people to do these things, but it certainly meant that someone was engaging with it. And Christopher and I were really interested in that too. So that was Portland. That was the West Coast. I'm going to return us very briefly to Harlem, just to kind of end on a larger note. This was a pretty big show that I'm proud of. That was a look at a generation of artists who kind of came with the building, who really started at the time that the museum did, or were at the height of their career. And again, we're given space in the museum in a really important and kind of paramount way. People like Elizabeth Catlett, David Hammonds, who I've mentioned before, Jack Whitten, just incredible artists. And I didn't pair them exactly. I chose kind of 8 of those anchors, 8 of those like pillars of art history, and certainly Black art history. And I introduced 18 other artists, Aaron Fowler, who showed here last year, who's incredible, and you all saw the work, so you know why I was so invested in it. That's Aaron's work in the next slide on the left. The Studio Museum now owns that in its collection, which I'm so proud of. So what I did was brought together these artists in this space kind of at this time to have a moment of reflection, to see if the concerns of 1968 were as relevant and as prescient and as ongoing in 2015 at the time that I made this. And it turns out that, yes, we're still talking about some of the same things and maybe expressing it differently or arriving at different kind of discussions around it. But America has a long way to go on issues of race and class and the economy and who it impacts and so many of these concerns. This is a detail of work by Torkwase Dyson, who was a site-specific wall work. Torkwase is someone who engages with psychology and space in really incredible ways. So you can see that she's kind of mapped, if you look closely at the track lighting in that gallery, that lines up exactly the negative space on the wall. So she really occupied that space. It was like Halloween night. She had 3 days to install, and we let her in at 5 p.m. after she finished teaching. I didn't bother her the whole weekend and just left it for the next week during installation. And this is what she created, which is incredible. It's a piece that also addresses the history of lynching in America. The circles, the dots rather, are representative of some number of bodies who were lynched in our long history of this country and of that violence. So it's an abstraction, it's a bit solid-wit, it's seemingly non-specific maybe, but there's so much more kind of just below the surface there that I was really excited to have as a voice in this exhibition. Other people like Tony Lewis, who's a wonderful artist in person based in Chicago. This is a Calvin and Hobbes comic. A lot of what Tony does is obfuscates or obscures or manipulates language using graphite or eraser pen. And so this is Calvin saying something, but what Tony's extracted is make his mouth bigger, angrier. And I think I leave that to your imagination about who and what that is describing. A very small work with a very big impact. And this was in the same gallery as another patron saint of ours, Miss Adrienne Piper. And you can kind of see the similarities just in terms of like the graphic quality of work, the use of language, and again, to just kind of draw out some of the references and influences for this younger generation of artists, my peers, and to bring it into the museum in a way that I think I found fruitful, and I know that a lot of the younger artists did. It was an exciting moment for them. Just a few more slides. This is an installation shot of Rashad Newsom's small survey called "This Is What I Want to See." Rashad is an artist and a person I've known for a decade, and the body of work that we kind of got to explore in the space has been made over that decade. These are 2 videos. This is not 2 channels, 2 distinct videos that I wanted to kind of pair together. Almost as a man and woman, almost as 2 kind of figureheads, but also as representations of 2 forms of the Vogue dance form, the old way and the new way. So voguing, I'm sure all of you know what that is, popularized in the 90s by Madonna, but born in the late 70s, early 80s in Harlem, in the queer community there, in the Bronx. So again, just like a really positive moment to be able to bring that work back to its context, both for Rashad and I. The video on the left, Shane dancing in the old way, was made in 2006 at a residency Rashad did. I was actually there for the filming of it. So this kind of painted a picture. This is like the form in its essence. This is a study of the movement of Vogue. These are performers that Rashad continues to work with today in a live capacity, but also that he's always continuing to describe in the work. So I show you this video still from Icon, which was an installation in the next room, to kind of give a sense of the evolution of that video work and of those people and forms kind of in visual space. Icon is like an incredible, it's like a video game, it's like a music video, it's very exciting, it's an incredible piece. So that was a really important thing to be able to do as well, to kind of acknowledge that history in the context of Studio Museum. And then last but not least, the project that is ongoing, it's up through July 25th of this year. If you're making a trip to New York and certainly making a trip to the Studio Museum, please get to one of these 4 parks, or all of them if you can. Some of you may or may not know that the Studio Museum is about to undergo maybe not so rapid, an epic transformation. They're building a new building with David Adjaye and Associates. It's an incredible new project. We're expanding. It's the 50th year anniversary. So part of my being there was thinking about how we could kind of mark that time, but also start to move outside of the museum, which I think by now, again, you have a sense that I'm more than happy to do that. So I said that I would want to do sculpture in the public. And I identified these are kind of start on the map for historic Harlem parks. Jackie Robinson at the northernmost point of Harlem, kind of bordering Sugar Hill. St. Nicholas Park, which runs about 10 city blocks by the City College of New York. Morningside Park, which borders Columbia University and kind of the beginning of Harlem, which is a very contested space historically. And then Marcus Garvey Park, named after that great political figure that's about a block away from the museum. I commissioned 4 artists to create work in these spaces. I chose their sites and had just an incredible time. This is Rudy Shepard's Black Rock Negative Energy Absorber. You can kind of see that there's a little nook in which you can occupy and get your negative energy absorbed. Rudy was thinking, not ironically at all, he really wanted to see and test the potential of art to make good, to solve problems, to give a little bit of levity in dark times. And so this was the first time Rudy had made one of these sculptures kind of with that physical space to occupy, and I've definitely caught people in there and had it absorbed myself. It's an incredible work. And in Morningside Park, the one that borders Columbia, you can see some Columbia students suntanning there. Kevin Beasley, an incredible sculptor and performance artist. He works with music beautifully and sound. These are Acoustic Mirrors. Who's Afraid of Red, Black, and Green? A play on minimalism and a play on Pan-Africanism, and also a reference to an incredible painting by Carrie James Marshall. So these are called Acoustic Mirrors, and these are 8 feet in diameter. They're basically satellite dish size, and the components of the work you can kind of see in a little bit more detail here. These are pieces of clothing dipped in resin, UV resin. There's about 10 minutes that Kevin has to work and create this form, dip them in, and kind of make them these fluid, gorgeous receptacles that they are. And it's important to note that the clothing is sourced from a thrift store that Kevin and actually his family, generations of his family, have a relationship with in Harlem. His aunts go to this shop. Kevin has dinner with its owner often, and actually soon might take the space over in another life. So it's a really close and personal project that we are excited to have in that space. This is Simone Lee. These are 3 INVAs. They are a hybrid of all kinds of architecture, but certainly also of Simone's sculptural language. Simone, it was a really ambitious project, as these all were. These forms are 6, 8, and 10 feet in diameter, really solid pieces with thatch roofing. And Simone has been doing research into these forms for a long time. They're based on Muslim mud huts. They're based on Zimbabwean kind of architectures. And the way that she created these kind of hybrid forms actually took a poetic turn, thinking about the diaspora in Harlem. This is sited at Marcus Garvey Park, which is just a block south of 125th, and kind of this incredible meeting point of so many cultures. There's Little Senegal, there's the Harlemites who've been there for a long time, there's the newer generation of Harlemites, all kind of converging in this space and using this park every day, always filled with people. And I mentioned the thatch roofs because we ran into what I'll call a technical problem with the person that we had hired to do that work 10 days before we opened to the public. And we're kind of in a pinch. And I was at another site that day, kind of checking in on the installation, and 2 men walked by and they said, do you guys know what you're doing? Do you need a little help? To our crew who was kind of assembled on that day, and they said, yeah, actually we really do. Why, do you guys know something about this? These men were from parts of Africa in which they were trained to make this type of roof. So it came totally full circle. Simone and I cried that day because it was just everything that the piece was about. It was about the diaspora in the truest way and in all of its forms, and this idea of where home is. You can't enter these sculptures. So they're this representation of a home and a space and a protection, but you can't access them. So, there's difficulty in all of that. There's yearning in all of that, especially for the little kids who were so mad that they could not go inside. And then finally, an incredible work by Corey Newkirk, Los Angeles-based artist, who uses just like the most basic material in the most amazing ways. This piece is set on the top of a stairwell in St. Nicholas Park. Down by where you can see the cars is a subway stop entrance and exit. So my idea was, as you come out of your slog home and maybe turn towards the hill, you encounter this incredible iridescent thing just kind of like hovering over the stairwell. So these are strips of, industrial kind of like refrigerator fringe outside of the industrial fridge. That's what that is. Corey just found like a really beautiful color, and people who were willing to play with him on this project. They're about 12 feet tall, these strips of plastic. So the posts stand about 20 feet in the air, and they just kind of blow around in the wind. They stick together. They capture the light beautifully at some times of day. They frame the architecture of the city college. They become architecture themselves. They're like these incredibly ephemeral and amorphous, strange things. And for me, the most successful moment in that installation and in all of these projects was you have to understand that the stairwell here was in horrible shape. We had 7 to 8 men on scaffolding that they would build up on these slate stairs that were not even. They had not been repaired in a very long time. It was an extremely dangerous job. We were installing in July also, so it was hot as hell. So it was a lot of work, and the contractors we worked with believed in it. They believed in me. We believed in them. Like, it was a wonderful collaboration. And after we finished installing, in one day, if you can believe it, a woman, clearly just a neighbor, walking by, didn't look at us, didn't really even look at the art, and she said, "It's about time." So that is why I do what I do in public space, in private space. My work as a curator is about educating, and that's something that's so close to my heart in everything that I do and that I want to share with everyone, wherever you are at any given time. Thank you.